In 1985, a local news report aired a brief mention of a house fire that claimed a family of four, family no census, school, or church ever recorded. There were no birth certificates, no dental records, no neighbors who remembered them, but the table was set for 5. In 2023, while digitizing old VHS archives, an intern paused on frame 64 and saw a fifth figure standing behind the reporter, smiling directly into the lens. Their eyes were burned out, but the silhouette matched a child who would be 38 if they'd ever been born. Don't rewind it. Frame 65 starts moving on its own. The reel clicked. It was not a sound of technology, but of something older, like the breath of dust between plaster walls. The static filled the room first, spilling out from the CRT like fog, curling at the ankles of a woman who hadn't meant to stay this long. Eleanor should have left when the sun began leaning behind the steeple, but the tape had been in the drawer that shouldn't exist, a warped cabinet tucked between filing shelves and painted drywall. One she swore hadn't been there before. She sat, elbows on her knees, the chair too small and too hollow. The footage rolled first, snow, then a flicker, and then a corridor. Long, institutional, the kind built for silence. Fluorescent lights stammered overhead, walls the color of diluted ash, a hallway that looked like it belonged beneath a school or a convent, or something worse. In the corner of the screen, the time stump blinked. November 3rd, 1985, 11:39 p.m. The station didn't air past 11. Eleanor leaned forward, heart stitched too close to her throat. Her breath fogged the monitor once. Then again, though the room was still, the footage, it didn't feel filmed. It felt remembered. There were no voices, just the mechanical whir of the tape, and somewhere deeper, beneath sound, the hiss. Oh, forgotten air vents. The hallway ended in a door with no handle. Beneath it, faint light fractured, like someone was holding a lantern behind cracked glass. She paused the footage, rewound 10 seconds, pressed play. The light flickered once, then again. On the third pulse, the static distorted for a breath. She thought she saw a figure just outside the frame, not walking, watching. Eleanor's hand hovered over the control panel. Her fingers trembled slightly, the way they had when she first opened the redacted file cabinet, labeled 1952, missing C, archive head. Inside, the folders were thin but sharp-edged, pages that smelled of scorched paper and institutional glue. Names had been blotted out in thick, repetitive marker. Only one had been left, perhaps missed by a tired archivist, or left for her to find. Thomas Greyson, unretrievable. She had known a Thomas, or thought she had. Her mind couldn't place the memory. Just a burnt photo of a boy in the background of a class portrait, his face half peeled, the top edge charred, but his eyes unmistakable, looking at the camera like he knew it was lying. Back on the screen, the hallway remained still. Eleanor adjusted the tracking dial. A hymn began to filter through, warped and slow, as though underwater. It wasn't music. It was memory put on loop. The same 4 notes, again and again, until meaning drained from sound. She whispered the line that followed, involuntarily. Beneath the floorboards, we forget who we were. She didn't know where she'd heard it. Maybe in a dream. Maybe not. The footage jumped now. A room, cinder block walls. A mirror, old oxidized, hung crooked above a rusted sink. But the mirror didn't reflect the room. It showed a different one. A playroom, perhaps. A child's chair. A wooden horse missing an eye, and on the floor a child's shoe. The exact one Eleanor had found 3 days ago, buried in the garden bed, outside the broadcasting station, size 6, untied laces, half filled with soil like someone had tried to plant it. She looked at the screen. The shoe was identical. Same scuff, same faded logo. Her pulse slowed unnaturally, as if her body wanted to flee, but her mind had already bolted inward. She paused the tape again in the mirror. The time stamp still read 11:39 p.m., and now it was also on the wall behind the child's chair, scratched into the paint with something blunt. A handprint glared just beside it, small, wrong-angled, as if the child had been dragged upward. The hymn looped again. Beneath the floorboards, we forget who we were. The words weren't part of the footage. They were coming from behind her. Eleanor turned. Slowly, behind her was only filing cabinets and a barred window that hadn't opened since 1992. She moved toward it. Cautious, breath shallow. Then she saw it. On the fogged glass of the CRT screen, her reflection, but the room behind her was different. The drawer that shouldn't exist was open again, and something was inside. She walked back, ignoring how the floor seemed to slant now, not physically, psychologically, like her memory had been quietly tilted. Inside the drawer, another reel, no label, no case, but around it, something soft. She lifted it with 2 fingers. A hymn torn from a book, page edges singed, words half bled away. She recognized the ink, not the content. Her grandmother had sent letters like that, always in black ink that never smudged. The reel clicked into place. The new footage began with a child's face, not crying, not blinking, just watching. His mouth opened slowly, like he was trying to speak through a wall. Then static, then darkness, then her name, Eleanor, spoken not from the screen, but the speakers. Soft, too soft to be faked. The voice had breath. She hit pause. The child's face held, grainy, warped, but behind his shoulder, another movement. Something stepped forward, not visible. Only its breath fogged the mirror. She backed away. Her spine touched the locked cabinet behind her. The hymn returned, but slower, twisted. A voice layered beneath it now, a woman's voice, whispering what sounded like he doesn't know he's gone. Eleanor sobbed without sound. Her legs bent. She slumped to the floor beside the console. Her hand brushed something cold beneath the metal desk. Another photo. She pulled it into the light. It was her, 10 years old, in a uniform she didn't remember wearing, and next to her, the boy, Thomas, holding her hand. A year written on the back, 1986, but Eleanor had been born in 1989. Her mouth parted. No sound came. On screen, the static cleared now. A long hallway again, but this time the camera was moving toward her, and the time stamp, still 11:39 p.m., was etched now into every wall, repeating like a curse, a loop, a warning. The camera moved faster. The light through the cracked door grew out, and in the final frame, the mirror shattered, not out, but inward. The screen went black, silence. Then just before the tape ejected itself, the monitor flickered one last time. A photograph appeared, burnt around the edges, dated, labeled, Eleanor Greyson, admitted, November 3rd, 1985. Status, unretrievable. The reel clicked, but no one spoke. Dust floated where voices once lived, and the static remembered her face. The table was still set, not for dinner, Not anymore. For memory, for illusion. For whatever remained after forgetting hollowed the shape of the truth. Jonah stood just beyond the threshold, fingers grazing the frame of the door, though he didn't recall opening it. The house hadn't moved, just the story around it. That's what he told himself as he stepped into the dining room of the Ashmere home, condemned since 91, forgotten since before that. A child's hymn echoed faintly, as if the walls themselves had remembered it. He didn't know the words, only the rhythm to notes, pause, one breath, the kind of song children sing with cracked voices and no memory of why. The floorboards creaked beneath his weight, though the room held no dust. The table was long, walnut dark, polished too, recently for an abandoned house. 5 settings, crystal glasses, forks still aligned by someone who understood ritual, or pretended to. Salt clung to the silver. Milk stood in a chipped porcelain cup, full, pale, and still, not spoiled, not even sweating from cold. His hand moved to photograph the scene, but the lens fogged over. He tried again, same thing. The air was warm. His breath didn't show, but the cameras did. On the 4th try, he took the photo. The milk reflected something behind him, a shape. He turned. Nothing. Behind the table stood a tall cupboard, painted white once, now peeling. At the corners, like paper skin, one of the drawers was cracked open. He hadn't touched it. He moved closer. The drawer didn't fit the cabinet. Different wood, different joinery. It didn't belong. Inside was a photo, curled at the edges. He picked it up, afraid of what he'd already remembered. A family, mother, father, 3 children. One of them, a girl with a ribbon in her hair, looked directly into the camera, into him. Her hand was raised, not waving. Pointing behind her was the same table, same cup, same setting. But on the back of the photo, in faint ink, it read, "Set for 5. Lived here 4. He closed the drawer. It didn't exist when he stepped in. And yet, it always had. The house made space for memory when it wanted to. His foot struck something under the table. He knelt. A shoe, small, left, the kind issued by state homes in the late 70s. Its sole was clean, untouched by the rot beneath the floor. A name was written on the insole, not in ink, but pressed, as if by bone. Jonah couldn't read it. The name shifted every time he blinked. He stood again. The chairs around the table were wrong, or perhaps right, in a way no one noticed. They were carved identically, yet their shadows stretched in different directions. 4 of them followed the light pouring in through the cracked window. The 5th didn't. Its shadow pointed toward the hall. He stepped into it. The hallway hadn't been there when he entered. His hands shook. He reached into his coat, pulled out the folded floor plan he'd copied from the redacted archive file, a layout of the house pre-1979. No hallway here, just pantry and cellar access. But the hallway stretched long, damp, wallpaper curling, away like blistered skin. He moved down it, careful not to disturb the silence. Halfway down, a mirror hung crooked. It reflected not the hallway, but the dining room again, this time empty, except for the 5th chair, which now faced the mirror, and a handprint on the glass. Small, inward-facing, he touched the wall beside the mirror. It felt too cold, too soft. He pressed. The wall gave. A door. He opened it. Inside a soundproofed room, the kind used in mid-century psychiatric wings. The padding had rotted, yellowed, but the ceiling light still flickered, not broken, just hesitant. In the center of the room, a small table with one place set, and a child's journal. He picked it up. The first page had no writing, just a drawing, 5 stick figures, one circled over and over again until the paper tore. He flipped to the second page. They said I shouldn't eat with them, but I heard her chewing when the lights went out. They didn't see, but the milk was always warm in her cup. I think she watches from under the table. He turned the page. The hymn keeps playing, even when the piano is gone. The chair doesn't squeak anymore. That means she's there. She only squeaks it when she's gone. He closed the book. The floor creaked behind him. He turned. The dining room was back, as if the hallway had never existed. 4 chairs now, the 5th was gone. He reached out to the mirror again. His reflection wasn't his. It was the child from the photo. Mouth open, silent. Then, in slow motion, the reflection lifted a hand and pointed down. Jonah looked. His feet were in water, thin, rippling. It hadn't been there before. He stepped back. The water didn't move, didn't soak, just reflected the ceiling, where another handprint now bloomed. He ran back through the hall, but the hall was gone. Back through the room, but the room had shifted now. The house opened a door he hadn't seen. He followed it blindly, and there it was again. The table still set for 5, but now every chair faced inward. A new photo lay on the table, a forensic still, the same scene, same arrangement. But in the photograph, the chair shadows stretched toward the ceiling, and none matched their legs. He turned the photo over, scrawled in ink too, fresh to belong. She never left the table. Salt still clung to the silver, the milk never spoiled, and outside, frost covered everything except the doorknob. She didn't blink when it started. The reel spun silently, even though the sound should have kicked in. Tape hissed through the deck like breath through a closed throat. The screen lit up in slow pulses, black flicker. Black again, then the image formed low-resolution hallway. Pale blue walls, water-damaged ceiling tile missing above a flickering bulb. Frame 61, nothing. Frame 62, still nothing. Frame 63, a girl, standing at the end of the hall, facing away. Frame 64, Danika froze. She reached for the pause button, then let her hand fall. Her body registered it before her mind caught up. Her chest was rising too fast, like she had run here. But she hadn't moved all morning. The light hadn't even shifted from the cracked blind. On screen, the girl was still, silent, grain-heavy. The reporter, visible only in glimpses through the handheld camcorder's wide swing, called out a name, Clarissa, maybe, but the sound was garbled, like it had been recorded underwater and buried in salt. The girl didn't turn. Danika hovered the scrub dial. Rewound, frame 62. Empty hall, frame 63. Figure appears. Frame 64. The face turns, just barely, but enough eyes. Hollowed. Burned out, not by violence, but something deeper, chemical, intentional. There was a smile, not on her lips, but her whole face, like she remembered something Danika didn't. She paused the tape. The hum in the AV room changed pitch, higher, as if something else had entered the power grid. She rose to check the wires behind the monitor. As she leaned forward, her breath fogged the glass, even though the room was warm. A handprint formed in the fog, too small to be hers. Danika backed away, her spine pressed against the filing cabinet that never opened. Her ID badge scraped against the drawer with the broken lock, the one she always avoided, because of the smell. She didn't want to turn around, but she did. The drawer was open. Inside, a burnt photo, curled at the edges, half ash. She knew it. Before she even touched it, knew it would be the girl in the hallway. And she was right. But it wasn't from the tape. It was dated 1983. The problem was, the building in the photo, the background, had only been constructed in 1991. She whispered, without thinking. The pictures don't match the calendar. The drawer slammed shut. She flinched, fell back. Into the AV chair, eyes on the monitor again. The footage had advanced. Someone must have pressed play, but she hadn't. Her hands were still shaking in her lap. The girl was gone. The hallway was now empty again. No, not empty. Not quite. Frame 69. A hairline crack moved along the wall. Not like plaster settling, but like something beneath skin trying to breathe. Danika advanced the footage slowly. Click by agonizing click. Frame 72. The camera shakes. Frame 73. A whisper. But not on the tape behind her. She didn't leave. She turned sharply. No one. The room behind her looked the same, mostly, except the mirror. One of those half-paneled security ones, mounted near the corner for blind spots, was showing something else. Not the AV room. A hallway. The hallway same as the footage. Same light flicker. Same shadow stretching across the floor and in the mirror. The girl was walking toward the camera, but not in the tape. Only in the mirror. Danika turned back. The tape had stopped. The time code was blank. She ejected it. The tape hissed like it bled. The reel was warped, not broken, just soft, like it had been kept somewhere too warm, too human. She placed it down, gently, on the desk, a low creak behind her. The sound of floorboards shifting under a weight that shouldn't be there. She turned, slowly. The mirror now reflected the girl fully, still smiling, eyes gone, but mouth moving, whispering something. Danika leaned forward, tried to read her lips, but the mirror now showed something else. The hallway again. But this time, the camera panned past room to see. The door was cracked open. Light spilled through, like something alive had gone inside without turning the switch. Danika remembered that room, or thought she did, in her first week on assignment. She'd tried to enter it, a back storage archive mislabeled in every file. The door wouldn't open, not jammed, just wrong. Like the keyhole wasn't connected to anything. She stood, walked down the corridor outside the AV room. Every fluorescent tube above buzzed a slightly different pitch. She reached room to see, placed her hand on the knob. It was cold, too cold. She opened it. Inside, a table. One chair, a hymnal torn open, hollowed out. Pages missing. One remained, numbered, but with no lyrics. A photo lay inside. Another girl, different than before, similar smile. Same eyes, burned out, yet knowing. On the back, frame 64, she sees you. Danika turned to leave, but the room had changed. No table. No photo, only a mirror. It reflected nothing. No dash, just not her. It showed the AV room. Someone sitting there, watching the screen. Danika's breath hitched. She watched, in the reflection. As the figure turned, it was the girl, not smiling, just looking back. In the AV room, Danika returned to the footage. Slipped the tape back into the machine. Hit, rewind, frame 61, frame 62, frame 63, her own face, now standing behind the reporter, out of focus. Frame 64, still there, still not blinking. She paused the tape to breathe. The figure didn't blink, eyes burned out, but smiling still. The room was silent, but her chest wasn't. Her supervisor reviewed the footage, called it artifacts, glitch, light interference. He swears, there is no one behind the reporter. Even now, they don't see what she does. The hallway didn't creak when she walked. At this time, that's how Leona knew something had changed. The floors always complained, old wood under older silence. But this morning, everything was too still. The kind of still that came after something decided it was done hiding. She reached the end of the hall where the ledgers were kept, room 104, or what remained of it. The door was half of its hinges. The brass plate had been removed, leaving behind 2 oxidized screws and a faint rectangle where a name used to live. Light slid in from a cracked window high above, casting soft lines across the stacked books, and rotted cabinets like a film reel that didn't want to play. The room hadn't been visited in decades, but it wasn't dusty. She crossed the floor slowly, her boots leaving no mark. The filing drawers along the wall were sealed shut with rust and water damage, but one stood slightly ajar, a drawer that shouldn't exist. Her hand hovered over it, then pressed, inside, a single ledger, black cover, leather cracked like dry lips. The binding had no title, no label, just a fraying red ribbon, curled like a wound around the first page. She untied it. The paper smelled like disinfectant and mildew. The first entry dated March 14th, 1975. Name, Ilara June. Birthdate, August 6th, 1966. Admitted from out of state. Parent, guardian, NA. Graduation status, blank. The next name followed immediately. Mirren Cole, same birth date, same pen pressure, same slant in the cursive. Different name. No graduation, then again, Beata Thorne, again. August 6th, 1966. Same ink, same hand, the 4th, Leona Vale. Her name, she hadn't gone here. She was certain of that. Her childhood had been a different building, a different country. But the date was correct. The entry was dated. And the handwriting, it wasn't hers, but it knew her. She ran her finger over the name, felt the groove in the page where the pen had pressed too hard, as if the writer had been interrupted. Or angry, something scraped under the desk behind her. She turned sharply. The desk chair had moved an inch. Not rolled, moved. And behind it, beneath the lip of the old wood, a small stack of children's drawings had been pinned with a single, rusted tack. She pulled the top one 3.5 stick figures in a line. One had no face, the others held hands. The caption, in crayon, read, "We are all the same girl." The hair on her arms lifted. She pulled another sheet free. This one was a crude floor plan, the school or something like it. But it included a corridor she had never seen, a staircase that went down beneath the east wing, leading to a windowless square, marked only with an X dot. She folded it and placed it in her coat. The window beside her flickered not to the glass, but the light across it, as though something had moved outside. But the courtyard below was empty, snow-covered, the only mark. A child's shoe, upright, as if someone had stepped out of it mid-dash walk. She turned from the window. Her reflection in the glass hadn't moved. It was still facing the ledger. She stepped backward. It didn't. Then slowly, the reflection raised its hand and pointed toward the corner of the room, where the old hymn book lay open. She hadn't touched it. It hadn't been there before. The page was torn halfway down. Only part of the verse remained. The names are not for keeping. The names are not your own. Repeat them till forgetting. Then leave them carved in bone. The rest of the page had been singed at the edge. Smoke damage, not fire. She turned back to the drawer. The ledger had changed pages. A fifth name had been added. Dated today, her own. Again, but the handwriting had shifted. Sloppier now. Like a child's. Still hers. She didn't remember writing it. Behind her, a whisper. We are all the same girl. The chair had turned fully toward her now. She moved back through the hallway, trying to find her way out, but the doors had changed. The corridor looped. At the fourth turn, the same window greeted her again, with the same shoe. Only now there was a handprint on the glass beside it. Too low, too small. She pushed through the next door, into what should have been the teacher's lounge. But the room inside was a mirror. Only mirrors dot wall to wall, seamless, and each one showed a different year. She saw herself at 12, at 6, at 22. But in none of the reflections did she look directly at herself. They were all slightly turned, as if the version of her in the glass didn't want her to know she was watching. In the corner of the room sat a pile of paper, more drawings. She knelt slowly, careful not to catch her own reflection. Mid-dash, blink dot, the papers were all the same. Children's names written again and again. Most crossed out. Some carved. One drawing showed a circle of girls with the same face. Hers holding hands around a building that had no windows. One of them had no eyes. One had her mouth sewn shut. At the bottom of the page, scrawled in waxy red crayon, "She keeps our names when we forget." Leona stood, the mirror closest to her, cracked a hairline split, crawling from the corner to the edge, like something pressing from within. She didn't wait. She ran back through the corridor that didn't, and down the steps that hadn't existed, into a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and flooded grief. The doors on either side were numbered, but each one had the same number. 6. She reached the final door. Inside, a small room with a desk. On it, a mirror, not decorative, surveillance grade, and below it, another hymn book. The final page was torn out and taped to the wall. Her name was written in a child's hand, but she had never written that way. Not like this. She stepped closer. Her reflection didn't follow. The name on the paper shimmered slightly, then split into 4 names. All hers. She touched it, and behind the wall something moved. Something that remembered her better than she ever had. A name scrawled in a child's. Drawing her own name. In handwriting she never learned. They told Miriam there were 4 rooms. The house stood crooked on county land, parcelled, condemned, and quietly omitted from tax rolls after 1993. She was there under pretense, evaluating archival structural integrity. The request came stamped and misfiled, as most of them did. No one asked who sent it. No one signed it. Just coordinates and a typed memo. Review blueprints, dated prior to 1970. Original architectural survey is considered incomplete. She had brought the plans with her. 5 rooms, clearly drawn. Square footage, annotated with uncharacteristic precision. A child's sketch had been taped to the back of the blueprint, unmarked by any clerk. Crayon-thick outlines, 4 rectangles, 1 hidden beneath a red scribble. The 5th room. She pressed the blueprint to the wall inside the home, aligning lines to the bones of the building. The measurements held, but the wall, DIDN, She traced the fourth room with her fingers. The dining hall, long collapsed, then followed the dimensions west to the wall that shouldn't be there. The house was quiet, but something pressed behind it. Not noise, not movement. A stillness so full it felt like breath. The floorboards beneath her bent gently. She stepped back. The house was shifting, or the memory of it was. She reached into her folder, pulled the county records from 1987. Only 4 rooms listed. A revision note. 5th chamber, decommissioned. No structural support, rerouted. But the blueprints disagreed. The paper was original. The ink had bled slightly into the weave. Blue lines sharp, labeled with initials that didn't match. The surveyor of record, and in the bottom margin, a note she hadn't noticed before. Room 5, constructed without windows, per request. She dropped her pen. The room exhaled. A draft rose through the warped floor. Warm, thick, the way breath feels after crying too long. She turned her head toward the hallway, where a thin slice of light leaked through a cracked doorframe. The 5th room, it had no door, but it was there. She stepped toward it. Each footfall echoed like memory. Instead of sound, the wall was paneled in uneven wood, older than the rest. Painted over once, then scraped down, then painted again. In the middle, faint lines where a door had once been sealed shut. She pressed her palm to it. The wood gave slightly, as if waiting. She pressed harder. It creaked, cracked, groaned like something in pain, and then a sliver broke open. Light fell through from somewhere inside. Not warm light, not electric, the kind of light that belonged to places no one visits willingly. She slipped in sideways. The 5th room was small, square, silent. It had no furnishings, no walls, not in the traditional sense. Just layers of drawings, papers, hymn pages, and peeled photographs, tacked and plastered to every surface like desperate memory. And across the back wall, a mirror, cracked diagonally. But the reflection was clear, and it didn't show her. It showed the architect. She knew it without knowing. A man hunched over blueprints, scribbling something out and redrawing it in thicker lines. Behind him, 5 children, none moving, all watching. The reflection changed now. A close-up, a burnt photo being taped to the wall. Her photo, her face, at age 9, tilted slightly. Behind her, the house, but different, fully intact, and above her shoulder, a shadow that didn't belong to anything. The mirror fogged slightly, though the room was still, a breath on glass. She stepped closer, hand brushing the wall beside it. Something shifted under her touch. The wallpaper lifted slightly, as though hiding something inside. She peeled it back. A list, names carved into the drywall. Dozens, all in the same cursive hand. Dates beside them, most ended with the same note. Transferred to room 5. She turned. Fast, something behind her. Nothing but the crayon on the floor had melted into the wood, forming loops, letters. She bent down, traced them. Her name, half-formed, childish, scraped into the floor beside a broken fingernail, still embedded in the grain. She stepped back. Her heel struck something soft, a child's shoe, left foot, torn laces. She didn't pick it up. She couldn't. The hymn began, soft, distant, warped like old tape. They hide the names, but not the rooms. The rooms remember where they're from. She turned toward the sound. A drawer in the wall had appeared, square, splintered, built where no drawer belonged. She opened it. Inside, a hymn book, half consumed by mold. The last page torn out. A note instead, revised per directive. 5th room to remain inaccessible by floor plan. Use walls. Her hands trembled. The room shifted. The door behind her was gone, in its place. Another mirror. This one reflected the present. Her standing breath quickened. And just beside her, a figure, smaller, staring directly at her reflection. A girl, smiling eyes burned out. But knowing the walls shook slightly. No collapse, no sound, just rearrangement. As if remembering how it was built, she backed toward where the doorway had been, pressed her hand there. It didn't open, but something behind it moved. She pulled the sample board from her bag, the one she'd cut from the corner earlier. Before finding this space, set it on the ground. The underside showed layers, paint, glue, rot, and something else caught in the seam. She scraped it out, fingernail, melted red wax, and hairline. Groove's names scratched into the wood grain from inside the board. One of them was hers. Blueprints of the home show, 5 rooms. County records, list 4. The 5th has no door, but children's drawings show what's inside. And the floorboard sample from room 5 contains fingernail scrapings and melted crayon. She played the tape in silence, because the machine didn't give her a choice. No counter, no time stomp, no tracking meter. Just the slow grind of warped ribbon through a dusty realtoral deck she wasn't sure had been plugged in. The light blinked red, then green, then dimmed to something in between. Nora leaned closer. The screen showed footage of a hallway washed out. Color-bleached, humming with the grain of time. Empty, then something flickered across frame 22. Not a person, not a shadow. A compression artifact, maybe. A visual cough, she rewound it. Frame 21, frame 22, frame 23. Nothing but when she pressed play again, the voice began, not synced, not sourced, just a voice, whispered and late by several seconds. A child, stop before the door opens. Nora paused. The tape, there was no door, only a long corridor lined with lockers, fireglass, and one mirror at the far end cracked down. The center like a hairline fracture of the building's memory. She checked the case file. Site Bellevale Orphanage, closed 1982. Fire damage. Survivors, 0 officially, 2 rumored. Transcripts, redacted. Cassette marked, do not sync. File, out of sequence. The label on the tape was handwritten. W134, names not spoken. She didn't remember checking it out, didn't remember being told to review it. But her initials were on the docket. Twice she resumed playback. The hallway had changed, same layout, different wallpaper. Peeling now, the edges curling away like mouths that once sang. A hymn bled through, muffled. Familiar, though she didn't know why. Stay behind the line. Stay where they forgot you. The voice was sharper now, still, soft, but aware. Spoken not for her, but through her. Nora reached for her notes, tried to write it down, but her pen didn't move. The ink bled backward into the barrel. She stared at it. Then the lights flickered. A drawer behind her slid open with a tired wheeze. She hadn't opened it. She never had. Inside, a burnt photo, familiar and scorched. The image curled from heat. A girl at the edge of a group, uniformed, unsmiling, eyes fixed on the camera. Behind her, a wall of names, etched into concrete, painted over, then scraped. Raw.1 of the names matched Nora's, except it wasn't hers. Not the one she used. Not the one on her file. She flipped the photo over. A single word. Listen. The tape reversed itself, screeched once, then played forward again. Now the hallway was shaking slightly, or the camera was the mirror at the end of the corridor. Reflected something inconsistent. The time stamp on the screen flickered a year that hadn't happened yet. 2029. The footage was from 1980. Nora stood, turned toward the glass window beside her workstation. Nothing, then breath fogged it from. Inside, a soft handprint emerged in the condensation. She blinked. It was gone. She sat back down. Rewound. Frame 64. Frame 65. The hallway lights pulsed in the reflection of the cracked mirror. A shoe, a child's shoe. Red canvas, frayed laces, size too small for any file she'd seen. Nora reached down, opened. Her bag, the same shoe was already in it. She didn't remember how. She ran her fingers across it, gently. Inside, tucked beneath the worn insole, a torn piece of paper. A hymn line. The names they gave us weren't for keeping. The same verse had been found etched into the walls of room 5 during the forensic survey last spring. She hadn't been there, but she remembered the smell. The screen warped, audio distorted. They called me Laurel. They called me Claire. They called me when no one was looking. Nora's name was none of those, and also all of them. The mirror in the footage began to bleed light, not beam, but leak, as if some other room was pressing behind it. She paused the footage. The figure in the mirror, half seen. Childlike face burned out. Hair cropped close, was pointing, not toward the hallway, toward the camera, toward her, Nora. Reached toward the tape machine. It hissed. A drawer under her desk slammed shut. She hadn't opened it. She hadn't even known it was there, inside. A folded school map. Bellevale Grounds, 1979. The building layout was familiar, except for one room. A soundproofed booth in the west wing, labeled only WP below it, handwritten. In red ink, whisper room, staff only, no cameras past frame 88. She advanced the tape. Frame 88. The hallway door opened. A corridor beyond, not on the blueprint. Inside, a small cot. A child's drawing taped to the far wall. Crayons melted onto the floor beside it. She froze the frame. The drawing showed a family. One of the faces was circled, with her mother's maiden name underneath. No one on the team knew that name. She never said it aloud. It wasn't in her personnel file. It had never been written, except here. The tape distorted again. Sharp squeal, then silence. A voice not synced. Not real. Say it and be remembered. Nora reached for the remote. The screen flickered, and then the final frame played. A close-up of the drawing. Her mother's maiden name, whispered in a child's voice. That was the last word on the tape. Mirror. Didn't eat breakfast that morning. She hadn't been able to since the call came from archives. Kitchen detail recovered. Case 301B, your name's on the audit trail. She didn't remember requesting it. But the paperwork was stamped, dated, signed. In her own handwriting. She arrived at the facility with gloves. Already on, the building looked like it had exhaled its last memory and sealed the doors behind it. Ivy-choked windows, a rusted intercom that buzzed every few minutes without cause, like it was remembering something too late. The kitchen hadn't been accessed since 97. They said mold. She suspected other reasons. The lock yielded too easily. Inside, the air was thick with vinegar, and iron. Something preserved, but not food. She stepped into the cold room. 5 place settings. Still arranged. Plates white, rimmed in gold. Standard issue from the 1973 facility catalogue. 4 were crusted with dried residue, flakes of grain, oily smears. A single slice of bone. The 5th plate was clean. No crumbs, no dust, no fingerprints. But it had moved slightly since the last photo in the file. She pulled the picture from her coat. Same table, 5 plates. In the photo, the 5th plate had a crack in the rim tier. The plate was perfect. Mira looked up. The fluorescent tube above the table buzzed once, then dimmed. Behind her, the prep sink let out a slow drip, irregular, like someone exhaling through their teeth. She crossed to it. Dried blood stained the underside of the basin, old, thick, coagulated to the metal. She leaned in closer. Fingerprints, too small for adults. A partial report had been attached to the case. For prints matched deceased minors registered to the Bellwood institution. The 5th set belonged to no one, aged 6 to 8. No DNA match, no family. Filed, she traced the outline of the smallest print with a cotton swab. It flaked off. Beneath it, etched faintly into the metal lip of the drain, "She eats last." A drawer slid open behind her. She turned. Slowly. It hadn't been there before. She walked back across the room. Inside the drawer, a folded page from a hymn book soaked with oil. The title was missing, but the stanza remained. For the one not named, we pass the bread. She eats in quiet, walks with the dead. She placed the page on the table. It stuck slightly. Under the table, something scraped. She knelt. A child's shoe, right foot. Hospital tag still attached, frayed and water dash, warped, no name. Inside it, a burnt photo, 5 children, seated at a table. The same table, one seat is empty. And yet, 5 shadows fall on the floor. She flipped the photo. No caption. Just a hand-drawn arrow pointing to the empty chair. The mirror on the far wall flickered. She hadn't noticed it earlier. A pantry door beside it stood cracked. Light poured through, not electric. That kind of late afternoon light you only remember in dreams you're not supposed to keep. She stood, moved toward it as she passed the mirror. Her reflection hesitated. She didn't. The pantry was colder than the kitchen, though there was no refrigeration inside. A box of labeled ledgers. She opened the top one. Each page listed a meal service. Assigned staff. Portion quantity. 1 entry stood out. March 5th, 1985. 5 plates set. 4 children served. 5th plate cleared. No name listed. The log was initialed. MCHER. Initials. She hadn't been born yet. She closed the ledger, placed it back. A breath fogged the mirror behind her, but she hadn't turned yet. She faced it. A child stood in the reflection. Same height as the fingerprints. Same posture as the girl in the photo. But the girl's face was blacked out, burned away, not pixelated. But gone. The mirror cracked at the edges, slowly, like something whispering too loud. Then another sound. Behind the pantry wall, Mira pressed her hand to the wood, hollow. She stepped back into the kitchen. Now the 5th plate was wet. Milk puddled round the rim. Still warm. She moved closer. There was something drawn into the condensation on the porcelain, letters, child's handwriting, her mother's maiden name. She blinked, gone. The overhead light buzzed louder. Then silence, until a whisper, "You don't forget what never was." Mira turned. On the far wall, behind a shelf, a cabinet had opened. Inside, a redacted file. Case 301B, her mother's name on the cover. She opened it. First page. Photo. A young girl, 6, maybe 7. Same shoe. Same plate. Her name. Myra Caldwell. But the date was wrong. Filed under 1984. She was born in 91. She flipped the page. Beneath the case notes, a fingerprint sheet. For sets matched. One set unclaimed, and one final note penned at the bottom in shaky handwriting. How can someone eat if they never existed? The air in the archive room was thick, almost too still, as Nora clicked the film reel into place. The label was yellowed with age, crinkled like a forgotten letter. She adjusted the projector's focus and pulled the lever. The flickering light cast long shadows, warped by time. Before the image settled, May 12, 1985, the backyard swing was slow in motion, the chains creaking with the lightest breeze. The child on the swing was small, no more than 6. There, face turned from the camera, eyes cast down toward the earth, hands tightly gripping the ropes. Their dress flared gently in the wind, but it was the swing's rhythm that held Nora's attention. The child's movements were hypnotic, repetitive, like they were trapped in a loop that couldn't break free. The camera jolted, a crackle of static, then the image smoothed again. Same swing, same child, same date, May 12th. But this time, the child turned, eyes meeting the camera for the first time. They smiled a soft, unsettling smile, as though they recognized someone they hadn't seen in years, or had never known. The image froze for a heartbeat before it skipped forward, another crackle of static. The year had changed, 1997, same. Swing, same child. Their face was less innocent now, more knowing, still locked in that same too-quiet smile. Nora leaned in closer to the screen, feeling the weight of something unspoken press on her chest. A flicker of memory stirred, but it faded before she could grasp it. She couldn't remember how she had come to hold the footage. She wasn't supposed to have this. She knew that. It had been buried. She should have left it there. She should have forgotten it. Butter, New Year, 2009. The same swing, the same child. Their smile had faded, replaced with a more pained expression. The swing's rhythmic motion, the way it creaked, had a hollow, ghostly sound now. Nora could almost hear the wood of the swing groaning under an unseen weight. The child had not grown. Time had passed, but the child's face remained unchanged. They were still the same 6-year-old from 1985, the same dress, the same hand gripping the ropes, now paler in the fading light of the evening. Nora's hands trembled. She rewound the film back to the beginning. 1985, the swing, the child, the unsettling smile. The room was too quiet. She stepped back, feeling the edges of reality bending. Or was it her mind? The weight of the air in the room thickened as she opened the next reel. Same swing, same child, but now the child's hair was longer, tangled, falling into their eyes. The smile was gone, replaced by a hollow stare that pierced through the lens. Their hands were still gripping the ropes as though they could never let go. The swing continued to move, as though it were always in motion, never stopping, never aging. The child turned toward the camera again, their eyes searching. It felt too personal now, too invasive. The film flickered for a moment, and then the child's voice, small and strained, seeped through the static. "Can you see me?" The whisper was almost too quiet. Nora's heart skipped. She had been listening for a voice, but nothing had prepared her for this, for the words. She hadn't expected this. The child's gaze lingered in the film, unwavering, and the swing creaked, the rhythmic motion now somehow suffocating. Nora rushed to rewind the reel again, but it moved too slowly, too deliberately, as if the machine had its own intentions. She forced it to stop. 1985, 1997, 2009, and now, 2023. She paused the film. The child in the frame was still the same. Her childhood smile, her mother's smile, had haunted her for as long as she could remember. But now it was different, more insistent, as if the child in the film was no longer a child. She was something else. Her own childhood photo, one she'd never seen before, had been placed beside the film reel. Her mother had kept it hidden, tucked away for years, but Nora never remembered seeing it. The edges were yellowed and torn, like it had been through something handled, touched, burned. Nora placed it beside the frame, the faces blurred, merging and shifting until they were the same. The child, the smile, the dress, the swing. All of it merged into her own reflection. The room spun, and then the child's voice returned. Louder this time, unfiltered through the static. "Don't leave." Nora stumbled back from the projector, her heart racing, breath caught in her throat. She could feel the weight of the presence in the room, like it had been there all along, just waiting for her to finally listen. The room felt colder. She looked back at the screen. The swing still moved, the chains groaning in the silence, the child still sitting there. She reached for the next film, the one labeled 2023, The Return, but it slipped from her hands before she could grab it. The floorboard beneath her shifted, a crack running along the length of the old wood, deep enough to swallow her entire body. "Don't leave," the child whispered again, louder now, echoing, reverberating through the room. Her hands shook as she reached for the broken film reel, but it no longer mattered. The child in the film, the same child from the beginning, was no longer a child. She had grown older, aged in a way that defied logic, but her eyes remained the same. Those eyes were now the eyes of Nora's reflection. The swing's motion slowed. The film clicked off. The reel stopped turning, and the last face Nora saw, the child's face, was her own. A birthday that had never ended. The same swing, the same backyard, the same child, always waiting, always looking back. The last photograph Nora saw was the one she had never seen before. Placed beside the 1985 swing still, the faces blurred until they matched, and everything else fell silent. The room held its breath as Nora opened the door. It wasn't the kind of place one entered with a sense of safety. It was one of those spaces that seemed to move around you the longer you stared. The seal on the door, though broken, had left a mark, the red wax still faintly visible against the crack. The symbols were inverted, almost erased, a form of reverse ritual that hadn't made sense until now. She didn't know why she came here. She hadn't meant to, but the reports were clear. The house wanted her here. The door swung open, creaking, in protest, as if not entirely willing to let her in. Inside, the air was thick. No window, just darkness pooled in corners, the kind of room meant to hide something. The walls were painted the color of old bone, yellowed, faintly stained. At the center of the room was a solitary table, the wood worn with age and use, though it wasn't used for anything anymore. A drawer sat slightly ajar, and the faintest smell of something burning lingered in the air. It was stale now. the scent of fire that didn't belong to any single event. She crossed the room, her breath caught. As she passed the table, something caught her eye. A child's drawing, taped to the underside, as though hidden, as though forgotten. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it free. The drawing was of a house, the same house, its rooms mapped out. In crayon and scribbled beneath it, a name, the one they forgot. The child had pressed the crayon hard enough to tear the paper. The edges were frayed. She hadn't seen this before. She hadn't even known it existed. The drawing had never dried. The waxy crayon was soft still, its imprint faint against the yellowing page. Nora's gaze fell on the drawer again. It was calling her. The air seemed to press her toward it. She slid it open slowly, unwilling to disturb the room too much, though she knew it had been disturbed a long time ago. A folded piece of paper, stained with something dark, rested inside. She unfolded it carefully. It was a torn page from a hymn book. The edges singed, burned by something that didn't belong to the fire. In the silence, we wait. In the dark, we stand still. What is remembered will not be lost. What is forgotten will remain. Her heart tightened as she read the words. They weren't familiar. She didn't recall ever seeing them before, but the feeling they sparked, something from her childhood, pulled at her. That strange discomfort, the unease of something half remembered. She couldn't place it, but it was as though this hymn had been sung too many times in the spaces between her memories. She folded the paper back and set it down, but it didn't belong to the drawer anymore. It had already seeped into her. She stepped back, heart hammering in her chest, eyes wandering over the room. The mirror at the far end of the room caught her eye. It was small and cracked, the edges jagged like something had been clawing at it. From the other side, she couldn't help but walk toward it. There was something about it, something that pulled her closer, even as her mind screamed to turn around and leave. The crack in the glass seemed to grow as she approached, not physically, but in her mind. The reflection was to still. When she finally looked into it, it wasn't her own face she saw. It was the same child from the drawing, standing in the center of the room. The same child from the early reports, the one who had vanished. Her mouth was frozen in a silent scream, eyes wide, staring back at her through the cracked glass. Nora's breath fogged the mirror. The face was gone. Not in an instant, but slow, as if it melted into the background until it was just her. Her reflection, but her eyes were darker now, heavier. The reflection shifted subtly. She hadn't moved. Her fingers brushed the surface of the glass. Then the door behind her creaked again, as though someone was watching. The seal on room 5, that strange red wax, had been broken once, but it felt like it had never stopped holding the room in place, as though time itself had been marked by that symbol, waiting for someone to unlock it again. Nora turned from the mirror, unable to shake the feeling that the room was both too old and too young, that it had always been there, yet had never existed. She walked back to the table, hands shaking. There, in the corner of the room, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small pair of shoes, abandoned in the corner, child's shoes. They were dusty, but freshly placed, untouched by time. The laces were untied, and something about them unsettled her. She bent down to pick them up, but something was wrong. The shoes were too light for their size, and as she held them, the soles came apart in her hands, revealing paper. Inside them, notes were hidden, crumpled, soaked in something that wasn't just water. The crumpled paper revealed the name, Myra, written in a child's hand. Her pulse quickened as she turned the shoes over in her hands, staring at the name. It didn't make sense. Mira wasn't supposed to be here. She heard a soft sound from the corner of the room, a breath, not hers. She turned toward it. Nothing but the drawer, the one she thought she had closed, had opened again. She hadn't done it. In the drawer was something else, a logbook, church records. One entry had been made one day after the fire. It was dated, Exorcism, Room 5. One name was scratched out. The rest were redacted. Nora flipped through the pages. It was clear now. The house had never stopped calling. The files, the drawings, the names, the child. They were all pieces of the same story. One that she hadn't understood until now. One that had been buried too deep. Her fingers trembled as she turned the page. The last entry was a caseworker's note, barely legible, but it was there, right where the file should have ended. The words were simple, chilling in their clarity. How can someone eat if they never existed? Nora's chest tightened as she read the final line. She couldn't breathe. The weight of the room settled deeper into her bones. She turned back. To the photo, the child's face, her own, now matched the one in the 1985 image. The faces blurred, indistinguishable, and the last thought that ran through her mind was, it was always her. The archive room smelled of dust and ink, of secrets, rotting in the dim light. Nora hadn't meant to be here, but the records were there, and she was alone. Pulling boxes from the shelves, as though each one might reveal something she didn't want to know. The cold of the room pressed against her skin, heavier with each breath. The air itself was thick with things unsaid, unfiled, stale, worn. She reached into the second box and pulled out the manila folder she was searching for. The label read, Kazi Trezentas EO B closed -1982. Her fingers hovered above it for a moment, a strange reluctance settling over her, but she slid the folder open without a second thought. The first sheet was a coroner's report, sparse, clinical. It was dated, stamped, signed, but the signature was missing. No coroner's mark, no autopsy, just a blank page staring back at her. A name written hastily at the top, subject, unknown. She flipped through the pages, hoping for some clue, but the same emptiness stretched across them, as if the file had been scrubbed intentionally, except for the photographs. The photographs never lied, for bodies burned beyond recognition, their outlines blurred by the flames that had consumed the room. She could almost feel the heat seeping through the pages. The bodies had been positioned unnaturally, their limbs twisted at angles that shouldn't have been possible. The charred remains, blackened to bone in places, were clearly visible in the photos. The ash had piled unnaturally high, a child's form unmistakable, yet unaccounted for. The fourth body, that one made Nora's heart stutter. It didn't belong to any of the others. There were no clear signs of identification, just a vague shape. A child's face, if it could be called, that half obscured by the ashen remnants, half formed, still in the same pose. It had been burned, but not as badly. The child's eyes, staring up from the floor, seemed to haunt her. The hands had been placed on the chest, as though to hold something in, but it was empty. Her stomach turned as she flipped to the next page. Nothing more than a record of the fire, the damage done to the building, the missing children. No mention of the fourth body, Nothing about the child that had appeared unscathed, untouched. She turned the page again. Something felt off. Beneath a set of diagrams, a note was scribbled in the margin. Room 5, access restricted. Subject found here. Do not report. She hadn't known there had been a room 5. It wasn't on the original floor plan, and why wasn't it mentioned? Her hand went cold as she flipped to the next page. A redacted letter, its edges burned and singed, most of the text blocked out by black ink, except for a single, chilling line that made her freeze. No one asked what burned last. She felt the floor beneath her seem to shift, as though the room was closing in. The breath in her chest thickened. She stood up suddenly, disoriented, and knocked over a stack of files that spilled across the floor, scattering in every direction. One file, left untouched, caught her eye. She kneeled, picked it up, and opened it. A hospital bracelet was inside. The barcode hadn't faded. It was pristine, as though it had never been worn. The name was printed clearly on the bracelet. Infanto. A chill crawled down her spine. She scanned the barcode with the scanner beside her, though she already knew it wouldn't match any existing record. It beeped, pending arrival. Her hand trembled as she pulled the bracelet free, staring at it. The thought gnawed at her, eating at her every time she blinked. Why was this here? Why had it been kept, filed, and forgotten? In the darkened corner of the room, light bled from the cracked window. She looked back down at the bracelet, the weight of it heavy in her hand, when her eyes moved to the corner of the room. A shadow, stretching unnaturally across the floor, had been cast by something that hadn't been there before. She hadn't seen it when she entered. There were no boxes, no files in that corner, except for a pile of ashdot. The pile didn't belong. It was too clean, too perfectly heaped, as though someone had spent too much time arranging it. She took a hesitant step toward it, then another. The air around her thickened, the silence louder now, pressing in on her ears. Her foot scraped across the floor as she approached, her heartbeat a dull thud in her chest. She knelt beside the ashdot there. In the very center, a small item glinted faintly in the light. It was a child's shoe, the same kind of shoe she had seen in earlier records. Red canvas, scuffed, but still bearing the faded label, unclaimed. She picked it up carefully, staring at it. Something about it didn't feel right. She knew it wasn't supposed to be here. The weight of it was wrong. Too light, too hollow. She twisted it, inspecting it more closely. The heel had been worn down, yes, but it didn't feel like a shoe that had been worn. More like something that had been made to be worn, then discarded, kept for another time. Then the thought hit her like a rush of cold air. The fire had burned the building to the ground, consumed everything. Why wasn't the shoe in the photos? Why wasn't it ever mentioned? Was it even from the fire? She stood abruptly, pushing the shoe into her bag, but the air in the room had changed. The pressure of silence had built up so slowly that she hadn't noticed. She turned back toward the table, desperate to find something else, anything that could explain it. And that's when she saw the corner of the room once more. The pile of ash had shifted. A handprint, not just a handprint. A child's handprint. It wasn't there before. Nora stepped backward, eyes wide, staring at the walls. They didn't move, but the room had. The air was too thick now. Her breathing ragged. The last thought she had before the room closed in was the name she'd found earlier, scribbled in the margin of the case file. No one asked what burned last. She couldn't ask. No one would. The file she'd been searching through had grown heavier, and yet it was the last thing she held. Nora placed it back. The shadows shifted once more, and a voice, too soft, whispered the final line in her mind. She never filed the death certificates. The footage flickered as the tape rolled. May 12th, 1985. The grainy images of a news broadcast unfolded on the screen. It was a piece of history. It had to be. A tragedy had happened. A fire had consumed a building, but no one was certain why. The faces were unfamiliar. The crowd gathered in front of a charred skeletal structure, their bodies blurry, the air heavy with smoke. The news anchor's voice echoed in the background, calm and controlled despite the chaos behind him. The camera zoomed in, and there it was, the remains of the building, blackened walls, melted windows. It was the kind of place you'd expect to find after a long, cruel history, a place that had lived its final, forgotten days in the quiet. But something in the footage caught Nora's attention. A child. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not in this broadcast. Not in this tragedy. The frame skipped forward. A little girl, her face turned, standing just at the edge of the fires. Reach. She was small, but unmistakable. Her eyes dark, almost like they were staring right at the lens. She wore a necklace, a simple string with a tarnished charm, and her dress, faded and torn, matched nothing in the story the newscasters were telling. The child stood in silence, unmoving. Nora's throat tightened as she paused the footage, her eyes lingering on the girl's face. A whisper in her mind repeated, like a warning. She wasn't in the original report. The room around her seemed to hold its breath. The stillness of the archive room was oppressive, a heavy weight pressing against her chest. She reached for the remote again, hands trembling. The image shifted again, but the child remained. She never moved. She never blinked. The camera angle shifted. The child's figure faded, but in its place, the same spot, the corner of the frame where she stood, now a blur. Her presence had been scrubbed away, edited into obscurity. Yet the footage didn't lie. Her hand was there, reaching toward the camera. Her eyes, now too wide to knowing, followed the lens. Nora felt the weight of the film in her chest, as if the child's stare had physically pressed down on her. She should have turned the footage off. She should have walked away. But instead, she couldn't look away. The faint imprint of the child lingered in her mind like something unfinished. She rewound it once more. There, the child's hand. It was the only thing that stayed consistent, the soft curve of it, as if the child was about to reach out, about to speak, but never did. The necklace was clearer now, though its shape was unfamiliar. She felt her heart race. It was there before, she thought. It was never mentioned. Nora stopped the footage again. The room seemed darker now. She stood, walking to the window and staring out at the courtyard below. No one was out there. Nothing but the rustling leaves and the quiet hum of old machinery. But the moments stretched. The silence gnawed at her, clawing at her insides, urging her to keep looking. She reached for the box beneath the desk. It had been there, hidden, forgotten, until she stumbled upon it in a file cabinet marked unclassified. 1983. The tape she pulled from the box was labeled with a single word, unfound. She hesitated, then slotted the tape into the player. The screen buzzed to life. This time the footage wasn't grainy. May 12th, 1997. Same fire, same tragedy. But this time the child was there again, standing in the same place, her hand pressed against the melted wood of the old building's remains. Her face was clearer now, her eyes darker. Her smile, if you could call it that, held something broken. She looked at the camera like she was trying to tell a story that was lost in the silence. But now, something else lingered at the edge of the frame. A name. Nora blinked. A name had been written in the corner of the frame in smudged ink. She leaned in closer, feeling her pulse thud against her neck. The letters were distorted, blurred, as though someone had tried to erase them, but they were still legible. Myra. The screen cut abruptly, the image shifted, but the room felt cold now, colder than it had before. The child was gone. The name Mira echoed in Nora's mind, bouncing against the walls of the room. She felt an overwhelming sense of déjà vu, like a memory she couldn't place but knew all too well. Her hand moved to her bag without thinking. Pulling out her birth certificate, she had never shown it to anyone. She had never had to. It was a relic, something that belonged to a time long past. But now it felt wrong in her hands. Her name was there, Nora Caldwell, but when she flipped the certificate over, the back held something unexpected. It was a digital timestamp, created 2023 to 2:19 a.m. Her breath hitched, her heart pounded, faster now, the beats growing erratic. How could this be? The certificate had been issued in 1985. She was certain of it. But why was it time-stamped for today? She dropped the certificate to the floor. It landed with a faint rustle. The room seemed to shift again. The edges of the walls blurred, like the house was trying to pull her deeper into its forgotten corners, deeper into the memories she didn't want to remember. The same child appeared in the corner of her mind. The girl, the necklace, the eyes. It all came rushing back. She had seen this face before, hadn't she? But where and why couldn't she remember? She reached for the folder, her fingers numb. As she opened it, she found the same photograph, the one from the 1997 footage, the child with the empty smile, the necklace she hadn't noticed before, now clear as day. It was a simple charm, a twisted circle, a loop of wire. But the strangest part wasn't the child. It was the reflection, her own reflection in the glass, not as an adult, but as a child. She stood up. The room shifted again. A slow breath, and she stepped back. The air in the room was thick now, pulling her deeper. The weight of the gaze on the footage, the weight of the memories, wrapped around her like a shroud. The last frame she saw was the child, still standing in the wreckage, but her hand, that hand, was reaching out toward her. The name still lingered in the air, whispered like a warning. Myra. The name was hers. Or it had been. Or it was meant to be. And then the walls faded away, and she was left with the weight of something unsaid. Something buried. But it wasn't buried anymore. And she wasn't supposed to remember. But she did. The tape clicked, and the screen flickered. It always did, just before it began. Just before the past pressed itself into the present, haunting the edges of memory. Nora leaned forward, her fingers grazing the cold metal of the VHS player as the first images bled into view. A backyard. May 12, 1985. The sun hung low in the sky, the shadows of a small wooden swing stretching long across the grass. The camera moved, unsteady, like a forgotten dream trying to hold onto its own form. A child's laughter echoed faintly through. The static child was there, in the frame. A small girl, maybe 6 years old, wearing a faded dress. She sat on the swing, pushing herself back and forth with the same slow rhythm, her head tilted toward the sky. Her face was out of focus, her movements languid, but her eyes, even in the poor quality of the footage, pierced through the lens. There was something to knowing about the way she sat there, still and alone, as if waiting. Nora's pulse quickened as the film continued, her eyes tracing the familiar outlines of the yard, the rusted playset, the overgrown bushes in the corner of the frame, the same house she had walked past every day as a child, the house she was told to forget, but she couldn't. The camera shook again, a jolt. The child was now facing the camera, her features clear, her eyes wide, like she was staring directly at Nora. For a brief moment, the girl's lips curled upward into a faint smile, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. And then, just as suddenly, the frame skipped. A jarring moment of distortion, the image warping as if caught in a pulse of static. It was too fast, too brief, and yet Nora's heart caught in her throat. The tape buzzed. She froze it. The child's face was still visible, the expression frozen in the briefest of moments. But it was what happened after that caught Nora's attention. A flicker on the edge of the frame, a shift in the shadows. For a split second, before the frame snapped to a new angle, the girl's reflection appeared in the window behind her. It wasn't her face. Nora leaned closer, her breath catching. It was another child, the reflection of someone she didn't know. Dark hair, wide eyes, a face she hadn't seen in any photos, not in any of the files she had combed through. The reflection blinked. The child in the window blinked. Nora's fingers trembled as she rewound the footage, watching the same fleeting moment over and over again. But it was gone. The window reflection was gone, replaced by the girl once more, sitting quietly, turning back toward the horizon as the swing moved in lazy arcs. But the room was different now. The walls felt too close, too tight. The air was thick. She could smell something, not just the dust of the old footage, not just the rot of the room around her, but something sweeter. The sharp, sickly sweet scent of burning sugar. Her stomach churned as she replayed the scene. This time, she looked past the child, beyond the swing, the grass, the flowers, the corner of the fence. But what caught her eye was the shadow beneath. The swing. Something had been burned into the ground. A darker patch of grass, almost like a stain. Her breath caught in her throat. The scent of sugar, of something burning, lingered. The camera moved again, this time swinging toward the house. The perspective shifted. A door creaked open. The house, the place she had been told never existed, was visible now, standing in the background. It was no longer a forgotten memory, no longer buried under layers of dust and silence. It was real, and it was here. The frame shook again, skipping, jumping, moving erratically as the image distorted. The noise of static swirled, vibrating. Crawling under her skin, another shift. The next image was clearer, but unsettling. May 12th, 1997. The same yard, the same swing, the same child, but the child had changed. She was older now. Her face was sharper, her eyes darker. Her clothes were different, no longer a faded dress, but a torn shirt, shoes scuffed. She stood near the swing, staring at the camera now, her posture rigid. She was older, but the swing was still moving, still rocking back and forth in the same rhythm. There was no smile now, no expression at all. Just the vacant look, the stare of someone who had seen too much, and yet not enough behind her. The reflection of the house was clearer now, but there was something wrong with the shadow of the swing. It no longer matched the way the child stood. The shadow was stretched too long, too thin, and something else had shifted. A figure appeared at the window again. Only this time, it was more than a reflection. The figure was inside the house. The door had opened. It was a woman. Nora's breath caught. She'd seen that face before. She hadn't seen it. Not like this, but she knew the eyes. She knew that face. It was her mother. The woman stepped into view, her figure barely visible against the backdrop of the house. She didn't walk. She floated, almost, her body unnaturally still. Nora had seen this face before, but it was different, now, empty, silent, hollow. The girl in the yard turned to face the woman, but she didn't move. She couldn't move. The smile, the one from the earlier footage, was gone, replaced by an expression of pain. A silent scream that never left her face. Nora rewound the tape, this time carefully, methodically, trying to catch every moment that had been erased from her memory. But when she reached the frame where the woman stood, the woman wasn't there anymore. The reflection was gone. Only the child remained, and the swing still moving. The tape clicked off. The screen went dark. The smell of burning sugar was still there. The room had changed. The walls pressed closer, as if they were breathing with her. And in the silence, Nora felt it, the weight of something unsaid, something forgotten. A child who wasn't supposed to exist, but she had. And then, slowly, very slowly, Nora turned toward the mirror that hung beside her. It wasn't there before, but now the glass was fogged. Breath, her breath, but it wasn't just hers. The reflection was wrong. The figure moved behind her, reaching out, but it wasn't her hand. It was the child's hand, that same small hand pressed against the glass. She stepped back. The air felt suffocating, heavy with memory. And then, in a whisper she barely heard, the words came, "If they never lived, how do you explain the handprint on your mirror?"